And finally, let's talk about issues with early employees, most notably equity. So let's talk about co-founders, and let's talk about using equity to get people to help you out with your business. Equity is just ownership in your business. If you are how many of you are currently running a business with a partner? And how many of you, for the business that you're thinking of starting in the next 6 months, you're considering bringing on a partner? So I am a big fan of starting business with partners. The last 2 businesses, I had a co-founder in each case. There's a co-founder in Docstoc. He's our CTO. He's been with me from just about the very beginning. I had the idea and started working on building out the product, but he came on soon afterwards, and since then we've done everything together to build up this business. The key thing that is important is if you're looking to start a business with one or more than one people, you have to have a process in place for how you're going to make decisions when you disagree. And that can, at the very most simply, be solved by this person has a little bit more ownership percentage than the other, and so you're not equal partners, and when that one person gets to make all the decisions, it can still be that you have equal percentageships, but you have to have a process in place for how you're going to make a decision when you disagree, because you will. You're going to have different points of view about your product and service and how to get customers and how to build your business. And one of the major things that causes big issues in businesses is that when there's nothing to lose in the beginning, everyone's like, hey, let's do this 50-50, it's great, it's no problem. But then either when things start going bad or when you start having success, people have a lot more opinions on the way they want to do things. And those opinions often then will lead to issues and problems that could threaten and jeopardize your business. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you start your business with one or more people, that there is a decision-making process in place for how you are going to make a decision and come to a final decision when there's disagreement. And again, that can be done by having different tiers of ownership. It can be done by just agreeing that even though you have equal ownership, one person gets to make the final call, but you have to live by that. And you cannot make decisions in a business by a committee. If you are thinking about starting a business with somebody else and you're saying to yourself or to somebody else, you know, we just make the decisions together, I promise you it's a recipe for failure. You should always be collaborating with your partners and with your employees and with your customers. You should always be getting other opinions. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the vital important decisions, one person has to be able to have a final say and say, hey, this is what we're going to do and move forward on, or else it's going to be an absolute killer in your business. What this also brings up is the fact that when you're starting a business with somebody, especially when it's an early stage, you want to have a partnership agreement that allows for a lot of if-then situations, mostly meaning what are you going to do if one partner wants to leave? So if we start a business together and after 6 months you want to leave because there's issues or pressures with your family or because it's not the business that you want to work on anymore, how do we address that? And so you have to have in the partnership agreement basically something that addresses all those situations. If one partner wants to leave, what percentage of ownership do they get to take with them? If 2 years down the line they want to leave, then what percentage of ownership do they want to take with them? And most typically it's done by having some kind of vesting period for the co-founders, which means you both have to stay in the business for a certain period of time and you mutually earn your ownership together. Now, if you have let's say a retail business or something more straightforward where you're never going to get an investor, and let's say neither of you put in any capital, it's just you both put in your time and you start to build up this business together, well then what you need to think of in these partnership agreements is, all right, well if in 6 months from now, if in a year from now, you want to leave the business, do you still get to keep your full 50%? So there's probably at some point for some economic value or for some other value, the ability for the first partner to buy back the ownership of the person leaving the business. Or you may just come to an agreement that, look, if either of us leave in the first year, we're voluntarily giving up our entire ownership and the other person gets to have it. And so you want to think through these different situations, and depending upon what you're in, there's any number of ways to kind of skin this cat. What's less important to start is to figure out, well, what do I do in my situation? Because every situation is different. What's more important is that you literally think of what's everything that could go wrong that we think is within the realm of going wrong within our partnership, and let's have an if-then situation for that. If you leave because you get a job and it pays you so much money that you don't want to work on this business anymore, then how do we handle that? If you get pregnant and you want to spend time with your family, how do we handle that? If the business isn't paying you enough money to sustainably live on after 9 months, but it is paying me enough, or I have some resources that you don't, and I can keep going and you can't, then what do we do? So you want to think through any situation that could cause a dissolution of you working with your early co-founders and partners, and what you want to do is you want to have something in writing that addresses how you will handle that situation at a future point. And if you don't, I promise you it's going to be a nightmare for you and a huge distraction for their business. There are so many instances where I see a business that's just starting to gain some momentum that ends up falling apart, not because it can't keep having more success, but because two partners want different things and they didn't have anything in writing, or they didn't talk about that situation ahead of time, and they're first trying to figure it out at that point later on when the business is starting to be successful. That's not when you want to deal with those issues. You want to have them all flushed out ahead of time. The last area is on if you are giving away equity, ownership in your business for work. So let's say you don't have the cash to get something done and you're willing to give somebody some ownership in the business. First off, a lot of times people ask me, well, how do you actually know how much to give up? How much do I know how much to give up for the work that they're going to do? The simplest way to do this is that you have to set and agree upon a valuation of your business. So let's say you say, the value of my business right now is worth $1 million. And really that's determined by nothing more than what the two of you can agree on what you agree that the value of the business is. Or if you have a third-party validation because some investor invested at that valuation for your business. So again, if someone gave you $100,000 for 10% of your company, you have a market validation of $1 million for your business. Now, let's say you had that $1 million valuation and you want somebody to do design work for you, but you don't have the money to pay them in the present. What you'll most typically do is say, all right, let's see how much the value of your service would be if you charged me market rate. And that market rate may come out to $10,000 for that project. And then what you would do is you would take that $10,000 and would count as an investment in a company for that $1 million. So in that case, it would be 10,000 over $1 million, so that'd be 1% of the company, right? If you provide me a service that's worth $10,000, I don't have the money to pay you, and I've got a business that's worth $1 million, by me not giving you that $10,000 in the front and you exchanging it for equity, it'd be worth 1% of the company. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. But what you typically, if you're the service provider, there's the concept of the time value of money, right? I'm taking risk in the fact that you may never be able to pay me back. So there's usually some multiple on top of the market rate that I would ask for. It might be 50% more, it might be 2 times more, it might be 3 times more. It's typically just a negotiation, just like the valuation itself is a negotiation. So again, if I need to try to get a designer to do work for me, and their typical rate would be $10,000 for this unit of work that I need, and my company has a valuation of $1 million, one thing I could do is say, hey, look, for this unit of work, not only am I going to give you the 1% that if you had cash to invest in my business that you would get today, but I'm going to give you 2% because I'm going to value the risk that you're taking as double what your market rate should be, and thus you're going to get 2% of the business. And that's a simple way to be able to exchange equity for value that you need in the present. Now, that's very simple and clean when the service is provided as a unit of work in a period of time. What if it's not something that has a finite date? What if you come up to me and say, Jason, I want to give you 1% of my company to be an advisor, right? And I do this for a number of companies, and it's they'll offer me equity to be an advisor. And if it's a company that I think that I can help out and I like the folks, and say, sure, I'd be happy to do that. But what if after 15 days, the person that you asked to be an advisor turns out to be a total jackass? Like, oh, I wish I didn't make them that offer. Should you be locked into having to give them that 1% of your company? No. But the way that you address that is you have what's called a vesting agreement, which means that over a period of time, they're going to vest, they're going to earn a portion of the overall equity that you promised them. So with board of advisors agreements, what's typical is that you put a board of advisor on a 3-year vesting schedule where their equity that you promise them, and maybe it's a tenth of a point, a tenth of a percent, 0.5%, 1%, maybe it's more, vests over 3 years. So each month they earn 1/36 of that ultimate equity package that they're going to get. And while that's happening, if at any point, if it's 6 months in, if 12 months in, if 18 months in, 24 months in, you could say, you know what, this isn't working out anymore, and they've earned up to what they've got for that proportional amount of time. So if they were with you for 18 months, and they'd get half of whatever they offered if you wanted to terminate the agreement at that point. The reason why this is also important is if you ever raise any kind of professional money and you offer your employees stock options so that they can buy ownership, they can buy equity in the company, they're always going to get put on a vesting schedule, which typically means they're going to get put on a 4-year vesting schedule where they have to work at the company for a year, and only if they've been at the company for a full year will they earn 25% of their equity, and then after that, they can get paid out in either monthly or yearly chunks after that. So every employee that comes to work at Docstoc full-time, for example, gets an equity package in addition to their base comp and the bonus and their vacation time and other benefits that we provide. They get the right to purchase stock options to be an owner in Docstoc. But unless they've been with our company for a year, then they lose that privilege, and then afterwards they get to vest on a monthly basis for the next 3 years the remaining portion of their equity. That's a very standard practice for companies that raise money. But whether or not you're going to raise money, the key takeaway is that you have to be judicious and thoughtful in how you give away equity. And you can't give away equity full in the present for a service or for a value that gets paid out over time. Let me repeat that. You can't give a full amount of equity away in the present for a service or value you're getting in return that gets delivered to you over a period of time, because you may not want that value or service to keep continuing, and you don't want to have to be on the hook for the full amount of equity. And so these are things that you want to work out ahead of time, both with co-founders, with potential employees, and with potential partners. And those are the key things you want to take away with building a team.